Hey guys, I'm back in the shop here, and we are starting to get back to our hydraulic project. We have a box of parts here with all our stuff. So we picked up a flaring tool. It's a rigid. Oh, what's the model? It's so it does a 37-degree flare, JIC flare. I guess it's model 377, and we're going to use it to flare some hydraulic tubing, some stainless that we're going to put on our ram. So we got this so we didn't have to pay the guys at the hydraulic shop to flare our tubing anymore. So we'll test that out and see how it works, and then we also got all the parts that we needed. Some ferrules. I think we also have some tube nuts in here. Let's see, looks like a Boss fitting on a T with a couple of JICs on the other end, so those will go on the check valve of our ram. Other miscellaneous fittings. Looks like a bunch of JIC plugs, 1/2-inch JICs. O-ring Boss to JIC 90. O-ring Boss to JIC 45. Some 1/2-inch plugs, so we always seem to need those. These are JICs, 1/2-inch JIC caps, and a 1/2-inch male pipe to 1/2-inch JIC 90, and then also some hose. These are for our ram, and the others will go to our crab block. So I'm going to get these sorted out, and we're going to bring some of them over to this ram. And we need to mate this check valve up to here. So this comes off one of our hydraulic valves, and what it is basically it's a check valve. I don't know if it's called a load lock, but it essentially prevents this ram from collapsing under the load. And so the valves are open center, so if you lift up with it and leave the ram in the up position, in this case our crab davit, the weight of it will pull it back down quite rapidly, even without a load, with just the weight of the davit and the crab block. And if there's a load on it, it'll be very sudden and very violent. So this will lock it in the up position, and then when you open the valve and it senses pressure through here, it opens a check valve in here, or a valve, and allows fluid to flow through. We are going to mount this right off of here, and it's going to stay with this ram from now on instead of being part of the valve. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up and get some parts out, and we're going to put a O-ring Boss 45 off of here, go into a short piece of stainless tube, and to a 90 pipe to a JIC with a nut on it. And then on this side, this goes back to the valve, and over here I guess we'll have a 90. I guess it'll be positioned like this probably, and this will come off of here. Actually a O-ring Boss 90 right here, or a T I mean, and one line will go to this top port on this ram, and the other will go back to the other hose that goes to the, I think, the V port on the valve. So okay guys, so we're getting ready to put a 45 in a piece of stainless tube and flare it. And so I did test out my flaring tool last night, and we're really happy with it. It works really nice. Results are really good, I'd say. So I'll show you that when I get ready to do the next one. I do have a fitting on my longline reel that was done by one of the shops here in town, and so I just verified the height of it right here. This one matches up real close, and so I'm confident that the height of the flare is good and the width of it. And the results are really nice, so I'm super excited to have that tool and be able to flare my own tubing now. There's small places like this where we can utilize stainless tube instead of hose, and you don't have to worry about them failing at any point in the future, replacing them. The stuff will be good to go for a long time. If you change things, you can always reuse the tube nut and ferrule. Tubing here in Kodiak, it's, I think $12 a foot is what I paid for it. It's actually pretty comparable with hose, which, you know, we always end up paying 10 bucks a foot for the hose whenever we have hose assemblies made here. So $10 a foot for the hose plus the fitting, and so you can see the cost benefit of using tube in the long term. And I think the one place is $12.75 a foot for tube, and I want to say the other one is $10.25 maybe. So it's really comparable as far as the cost of regular hose assembly. So we intend to use this whenever we can in places where you don't have flexing or anything. And this setup here, it's completely rigid and solid, so there'll be no worries about using it in this application. So I'm going to get my bender and figure out just a simple 45 that I'm going to put on here, and I'll get it bent and then cut to length and flare the ends, and then we'll move on to figuring out what we need to do to make these two up on this side. Okay, so I'm just getting this layout figured out for bending a 45 on this. So this is a rigid tubing bender. It's a 1/2 inch. Pretty simple to use. I don't bend much tube, so I always have to consult it every time I go to do something, but in this case for 45, you would measure the distance from the end of the feature to this line right here, and so if that's the distance that you would want it, you would have a mark here, and that's what you would reference on your 45. So if you wanted a piece of pipe that's 3 inches long this way to the end of your feature, that's where you would measure 3 inches, and then you'd align it on the 45 here. And then when you bend it, of course, you'd bring it over here to the 45, and this represents X, and that ends up being the center of your arc. So wherever that line is, it's going to be the center of your 45 or your 90 or whatever radius you put on it. So it's pretty easy to use. The manual is simple, yet also shows you on multiple bends the offsets that you need to use for your adjustments. So it's actually a really nice setup. They show you how to measure and lay out pipe, so you add a little bit to compensate for the stretch in the pipe that you end up with, and that way you end up with the correct length when you're finished. So I need to keep this distance as short as possible, so I'll measure this, and if it's will work for me I may bend it and then cut it off and flare the other end. If not, I'll have to just start with a new piece. So I was just kind of looking at this one as an example. I think I'll probably just have to bend a new piece, because then I can choke the end up right to the very end of this, and I'll still have room to put my flaring tool on there. So let me take a look at that, and then I'll bring you back in when I put a bend on it. Yeah, so that other piece of pipe is going to be too long with the flare and the tube nut already on it, so I'm going to go ahead and get a new piece here and bend it. So yeah, I was saying, this is a really nice tool. It also has a big heavy base right here that you can actually clamp that in the vise, which is helpful. So I'm just gonna see how tight I can make this, I guess. Just gonna get it lined up here as close as I can to the end and give it enough length to hold on to without crushing the tube. I put a mark there. Now I know that it's going to be approximately 2 inches from the end. And I think that that would be okay. So that would be about 2 inches, and then of course minus the distance you lose flaring it, which isn't that much, but it is a little bit. And that's going to put me something like that, which would probably be okay, I think. Well, of course I can always trim this back too. And that's probably what I'll have to do, because I need to keep this check valve in as close as I can to this end to allow me adequate space to get this lined up. I'm gonna have to figure out how I want to bend that. Might have to do something like this, and then bring it in. So, well, that's as close as I'll be able to get that right there, because you need the tube latch. The tube latch needs to be able to hold the end of the pipe and keep it from sliding out. So that's really as close as I can get it right there. And we're gonna put a 45 on it, so we'll just line up the two marks, I believe. Right, so we bend it until the 0 on the carriage aligns with the mark on the body. Place tube in the bender, align the mark on the tube with the 45 line on the carriage. With the mark on the tube appropriate, align, move the carriage handle so that the 0 line aligns with the 45-degree line on the form. So that's the 0 line on the carriage. We'll go to here, and that will give you a 45. So here we go. Alrighty. So nice and simple. Release the tube latch. Open the carriage. And got a really nice 45. Minimal distortion. So that's going to be close. So as long as we can slide our ferrule down far enough to get our flaring tool on there, we're okay. We might have to make that a little bit longer. With the nut, it's no problem because you'll be able to slide it past the bend. So that's kind of what it's going to look like right there, approximately. gives me an idea if that will work height-wise. I don't think it is going to, so I might have to offset this way and turn my fitting, and that's one way I can do it, is like that, because the orientation of this on the ram isn't very critical. There's just going to be hose going to these two ports right there, so I can do something like that, and that might actually help me out when it comes to aligning this one down here. I might be able to do something just like that, and then just throw a 90 on the top of it right there. So we're gonna look at this a few different ways and play with it a little bit and see what we come up with. But I think this is gonna be okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and flare this and see. And hopefully there will be enough room there for my flaring tool to fit on. So I'll get it set up and then bring you back. Okay, so judging by this, it's there's just enough room, I think, for that to clear. The bottom of this flaring tool has got a pretty big opening, so it's not going to hit the ferrule or anything. So I think we should be okay. Simple design. Said in the manual, this can be hard to spread sometimes, but you just run it down to the very end right here and depress it with the lock, and it'll open right up. So it's really similar to a normal flaring tool that you'd use for copper pipe, other than the angle, of course. This is a 37 degree, which is for a JIC fitting. And then the other thing about it that I guess is unique is that it's got this clamp right here, and it locks into the corresponding guides right here. And that prevents these jaws from spreading as you flare it, because of course stainless is a lot harder than other, like copper, and that generally doesn't happen when you try to flare those, but with stainless steel it would. It just spread the jaws on the flaring vise, and so that just locks it in and prevents that from happening. And the other thing too is that the needle on this is elliptical, so I don't know if, doesn't look like we can take it apart, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but as this turns, instead of just going straight in it and mushrooming it out like a flaring tool, this actually spins, and so it rolls the metal as it goes around and around to achieve the proper flare, and that prevents it from kinking the stainless steel, because it's just slowly rolling it. And then the other feature is once it bottoms out, it actually, this pulls out, it's on a spring, and it'll come away from this clutch base right here. It's called a clutch, and the handle will separate from it, and then the handle will spin, and then that allows it to finish forming the flare. It rolls it around, and it basically, what's it say? Let's see. It irons and smooths the flare. So that's the official terminology. So yeah, I don't know if you can see it in there, but you can see that it's on a elliptical. So nice tool. Goes from gosh, 3/16 all the way up to 3/4. You can chuck it up in the vise. I actually did for even the 1/2 inch. It's not so much effort that you can't do it by hand, but it does get to be somewhat considerable. So let's get this chucked up here, and we will flare this pipe. Okay, so instructions said just to make sure that the end is square, reamed and free of burrs. So I don't have a reamer for it, but hopefully it's within tolerances as far as being round. I just chamfered it real lightly on the inside. Let's take off any burrs from cutting it. We'll chuck it up and give it a twist. So the manual also says that if you need a higher shoulder on your flare, then you just position the tube higher up in the holder. Less, you can go a little bit below, but it's generally recommended, I guess, that you're about flush. So you just get it positioned where you want to, and you slide this down. It has some marks on the flaring tool right here to locate the side, and then that way it'll drop into its corresponding hole and be positioned correctly until it's locked. You just crank it until it tightens up. Then as it starts to get tight, you'll see this start to separate right here, the handle from the rest of this threaded piece, and that's the clutch right there. You can see that opening up, and there's a pin in there that drives this. So as you tighten it up, that is gonna increase that gap until the pin slips out. And it's helpful to have this in the vise. And here it popped out, and now you'll just rotate it around, and then the pin will re-engage, and that's that. You're done. I did a full rotation and ironed the flare, and then you loosen it up and see the results. Of course, when you're making bends, you need to make sure you put your ferrule on before you do it, or you won't be able to put them on later. Usually your tube nut's okay. I think you can get it past just about any bend, a 90 anyways, so I don't see why you couldn't any others. But your ferrule will not go past any bends at all, so you gotta make sure that that's on there beforehand. There it is. Very nice flare. Just minimal tool marks from the clamp. Looks very good. Put your ferrule up against it. Find your tube nut. So that looks nice. So the one I measured before was about 13 thou here. That one's real close. And then 0.64 on the other one, so that's right there. So it looks like if it's just a little bit proud, it comes out right. That's the same as one from the hydraulic shop, so I'm confident that that's correct. Mates up beautifully. Goes on nice and easy.